I'm going to talk for maybe about 15 minutes. I'm going to show you things you've probably seen before. I'm an optimist around the clean energy transition, but I think it's going to play out in ways for investors that we need to spend more time thinking about. About me, I was one of the founding team at the Jupiter, the ecology funds. I can't believe it's 35 years ago, 1989. So I've been around for a bit. I spent about 15 years at Henderson NPI before going on to AMP, and I now run a non-profit financial think tank with colleagues called the Carbon Tracker Initiative. So this topic is on how the clean energy revolution is disrupting everything. About us, I don't know if not everyone knows who we are. There's about 45 people working at Carbon Tracker and about 20 working at the sister group Planet Tracker. And all of our research is downloadable for free for those. Our audience is primarily investors, not retail investors, predominantly institutional investors, and we generate research and analysis on what's happening in the energy transition. So there's two visions of the future. There's one vision, which is the transition is happening really slow, that we're going to fail our climate targets, and the investors have got to hang on into the existing incumbent technologies. And then on the other side, we've got the optimistic vision, which is that new technology is rapidly scaling and accelerating, and that we're going to, within the next couple of decades, we're going to overtake traditional fossil fuels. And that really is my sense of what's happening. I've got to tell you, I was in New York last week doing Climate Week, and I was just about to give my presentation, almost the same as this, very similar audience, and I had a climate protester. Fortunately, it was for the person speaking before me, not me. And they wouldn't stop. It just went on and on and on and on and on. I thought this was... I thought, Julie, you sprung a surprise. So what do I think this clean energy revolution is happening fast? It's one simple reason, is that we're moving from a world of molecules into a world of electrons. And it's really expensive to produce fossil fuels. You've got to ship coal, oil, and gas. You've got to produce it, get it out of the ground, process it, put it in a refinery or on a ship, and then you're going to have to ship it to the other side of the world. Then you're going to have to transport it, and then you're going to have to burn it. And then once you burn it, apparently the companies are telling us today we can then remove the CO2 with CCS. But just think how expensive that process is. It's really expensive. It's difficult to do. All the cheap stuff is gone. But on the other side, technology, we know how to make things. We know that TVs went, the modern TV went from $1,000 down to 100 quid. Same with our phones. Same with pretty much every technology. And that's what the battle is a technology battle that ultimately the newer, cleaner, more efficient technologies will win because they're cheaper and increasingly more reliable. And capital is pouring into this space. I'm not the first person to say this, and I won't be the last, and some of you may have heard me say this before, but we are living in the first human generation where we can cook, heat, move from A to B, create power without having to set fire to something, if you think about it for a minute. In every one of us, apparently, I don't know if this is true, but in every one of us, we've got a little bit of Neanderthal DNA, about 1%. Because in Neanderthal days, that's what we used to have to do. To cook, you used to have to burn wood. Or to heat yourself, you burn wood. And then we burn coal, and then we burn oil, and now we burn gas for power. We're the first generation to do all those things without having to burn a thing. And that's because of the power of this technological change. Now, technologies beat commodities, partly for the reason I've given you, that you can shift electrons quite quickly, quite cheaply. You can't shift commodities. And they're all on learning curves. The more we build, the more we deploy. The more we deploy, the cheaper it gets. The cheaper it gets, the more we build. And this shows you the technology cost downs for all the key technologies that we're building in the world today. I think today's Financial Times said this year we will spend $500 billion on solar alone. And the incumbents, and I also present to oil and gas companies. The week before last, I presented to about 60 folks from OPEC. So the Kuwaitis were there, the Saudis were there, Abu Dhabi, a lot of the oil and gas companies were there. This was at the Oxford Energy Institute. And at the end of it, the guy from OPEC said, well, that was a refreshing presentation. I think we know what that word translates into English as. And I think for them, it's unimaginable at the speed of this transition and how quickly it's happening on these S-curves of growth. And what I want you to look at here on the left is the World Energy Outlook from the International Energy Agency. Every year, even up to 2023 last year, they flatten their forecasts on technology adoption. And in the real world, as we can see, it's deploying much, much faster. And the same around EV share of sales and on batteries is the same. And I think the deployment of cheap battery technology and the new battery innovation that can absorb, for example, so you've got salt batteries, not just lithium batteries. People are thinking constantly about new ways of storing energy and then deploying energy. And this is leading to exponential growth in deployment. And these are the combined annualized growth rates in wind, solar, and battery, which are the key technologies. All happened in the last 10 years. I'm going to say in a minute what I think this means for investors. And solar, this is really the key one. This is looking at generation capacity. And then there's batteries. Pumped hydro storage is the historical one. Other types of technologies are now the key one. And if we look at generation capacity, this is data from the Rocky Mountain Institute. You can see actually it's expected within a year or two, generation capacity is not the same as power delivered onto the grid. Its generation capacity will exceed that of the key fossil fuels. What is this story all about? This story is all about China. Each year, China turns out 3 or 4 million students of technology. And what are they doing? They're getting all the latest patents. They're going into industry. These are smart kids going out, innovating. And this is China versus the rest of the world on electricity as the final share of energy. In Europe, we have this kind of, I don't know if again you've seen today's Financial Times. It shows the stock price. I think I might come on to this. The stock price of the Chinese car manufacturers versus European car manufacturers. We've been fighting the battle of better fuel efficiency standards in cars. The Chinese sort of said, well, go off, you can fight that battle. We're going to be creating the technologies that replace the internal combustion engine. That's the difference between their approach to this problem and the European approach to this problem. And China's leading the way to patent, which is what you're looking at there on the left, and then make and deploy, this is capacity, renewables. This is a China story. China did decide 10, 15 years ago that it would electrify the world and let the Americans and let the Europeans mess around with improving things incrementally when they've just said, we're going to redesign this from scratch. And they probably learned from the Japanese and the Koreans with their iPhone, well, China makes a lot of iPhones, capability. All an electric car is at the end of the day is an iPhone on wheels, and you're just making huge numbers of them at very, very low cost. So I said, what I think this means for investors. What I don't want to say is that because this switch is happening, that this means that investors are making money from renewables. Let me explain what I mean by that for a minute. So in the case of power, what we pay for in the bill, and I think you probably know this, the price of our electricity bill is set by the marginal cost of gas. So if gas is higher, then each one of us should have two bills when we get our bill. We should have the cost of the gas and then the cost of the renewables. And that would then tell the average consumer and Telegraph and Daily Mail reader that renewables are significantly, significantly cheaper than fossil fuels. So whilst we've got gas in the system and gas setting the price, you've got a commodity-driven price mechanism. If you can produce oil and gas at $5 a barrel and sell it at $80 a barrel, you're going to be doing that every day of the week. And that's what Shell and BP and Exxon and all the others are doing. They're producing at $10, $20 a barrel, selling at 80, you're in the money. Now, if you're producing renewable energy, once you've paid off the capital cost of your turbine and your solar, what happens to the cost of your energy? Your input's free, your sunlight is free, your wind is free. So the cost of your energy trends towards zero. So if you produce at $1, you may be able to sell at 5 cents. And that's why the returns from renewables are totally different to the returns to fossil fuels. So investors today are buying the yield on Shell and BP. That's the reason why you buy it. But on renewables, it's very different. Now, I want you to look at what this is. This was in the Financial Times last week. Electricity prices dropped into negative territory, a record 7,841 hours across Europe in the first 8 months of 2024. In Australia, you've got so much renewables getting onto the grid, you've got similar long periods where the energy is free. How many of us want to be running a business or investing in a business where what you're getting for what you're producing is precisely zero? That's why the economics of renewables, we have to change our entire thinking about the energy system. So let's think about it a minute. So I've given you the picture of fossil fuels from one side of the world to the other side of the world and how expensive that all is. And now we're going to be manufacturing energy in situ. So what are we not going to need? We're not going to need refineries. We're not going to need ships carrying coal. Here's another thing you probably know. 40% of global shipping, what is it? Shipping gas, shipping oil. So what happens to the shipping sector when we got off of fossil fuels? It halves in size. So we're not going to be we're not going to be going down to the petrol station because we're going to be powering up on our house. Half of the system that we use to create energy, half of it disappears. The energy system halves in size. It doesn't get bigger. So we drive costs out of the system, we drive the complexity out of the system, and we're creating a totally new energy system where and renewable share of consumption is going up, 42% in Europe versus 23%. And this is going to lead to more price cannibalization. So this is the way we've got to think about this, is that the energy cost today is going up because we've still got fossil fuels in the system. In coming years, I think the cost of energy is going to halve. And the best analogy I can use is, again, forgive me if you've heard this before, but I at home have a printer, and I was printing off some documents just the other day. And this year, I probably had to replace the printer ink 3 or 4 times. When you're buying a printer, you're not buying a printer, you're buying a contract to buy 3 lots of printer ink every year for the rest of your life. Now, what's coming down, what would you do if somebody was selling you a printer for the same price as your traditional printer, but you never paid again, ever, for your printer ink? You'd probably buy one. That's what's happening now in electrification of the energy system and of the transportation system. We're ripping out this sort of software as a service, SaaS business model. We repeat paying for something all the time. The best person to talk on this, and I think he's Britain's best businessman today, is Greg Jackson, the head of Octopus Renewables. If you've not heard him present, he's an extraordinary speaker. He's now one of the biggest energy companies in the UK. It's an amazing company. I think it's got 8 to 9 million customers. And I was debating Chevron and Petronas and Exxon at an oil conference. And I didn't do it very well because debating Exxon, it's a bit shit, basically. But Greg comes on next, and he's a terrific speaker. And this is an audience. Imagine you've got an audience of 400 to 500 oil and gas professionals. Greta Thunberg was outside. I had to do all the walk of shame in front of Greta where they were doing that shame on you kind of thing. But I went in to do the debate. And Greg Jackson comes in, and his opening stance was, my promise to our customers is we can give them energy for free for life. That was his opening statement. I turned around to see the reaction of the audience, and it was like, what's this guy talking about? And he said, let me tell you how we're doing it and the customers are doing it. We have a contract in Scotland where we're building new houses, and we're putting in ground source heat pumps or air source heat pumps. We're putting in solar on the roof, batteries in the basement, and for those who want to have them, an electric car in the front drive. And when power is really, really cheap. So in Scotland, the cost of wind is almost close to free, not quite, but nearly. And we put all that power in their battery at nighttime when it's basically free. And then when prices peak, we take energy from the battery and we sell it into the grid. And they press ka-ching, and the household ka-chings. And they sell energy into the grid from the solar. And they don't have to pay for the gas because they've got an air source heat pump. And that's the reason why he said that their customers don't now have to pay for energy. They're net positive for their energy. And I could see this was dawning on people. And he said, do you remember the days when it took 25 minutes to download a copy of the paper off the internet? And it was costing you, £20 a day or whatever it was. And today, we're in a eat as much as you consume with our mobile phone for £50 a month with a flat price. And ditto the same with Netflix and all the rest of it. And what he said to the audience was, that's the world we're moving to with energy. We're moving to an all-you-can-eat energy model for the consumer. So where does this go next? And I was speculating, I was thinking, well, actually, when people get more money from their pocket because they're not having to spend, I mean, one of my colleagues at Carbon Tracker, John, told me that BYD was giving him a contract for £139 a month for his electric vehicle, £139 a month for his EV. So when it's cheaper and as reliable and you're not having to pay the same bills, this transition becomes unstoppable. But it doesn't mean that we're going to make lots of money. So people have sort of said in the last couple of months, oh, look, the speed of sales on EVs, it's not what people said. And we've got to focus on the signal, not the noise. There's always going to be barriers to change, as we know. But those who solve them are the ones who get rich. Let's have a look at EV adoption versus headlines. And these are all real headlines. Are electric car enthusiasts a little too enthusiastic? Electric vehicle for everyone, the impossible dream. 10 reasons why electric cars still suck. We unplug the EV hype. Automakers are all in on electric cars, but US infrastructure is unprepared. Tesla can build all the cars it wants. The real challenge could be selling them. And if you read today's FT, you'll see that Tesla just missed its forecast by 500 cars of 460,000 cars, electric EVs manufactured. But when you strip back, it's the inexorable rise of your EVs. So here's some of the key data. This is the UK. It's only up to 2023. That's the drop in sales of the internal combustion engine, and that's the rise in sale in EV. But this is the one that grabs me. I said earlier that this is a story about China. Last month, Chinese EV sales exceeded the sale of the internal combustion engine. So European oil companies and American oil companies say, we're going to be making all of my money by exporting oil to China. China is the big new growth market. This is the reality of what's happening, is that China is moving to an electric. Why are they doing it? We talk about energy security. China talks about energy security. They have to import their oil from other parts of the world. America, one of the biggest exporters of oil today in the world is America. China's energy independence is no more oil imports. Get off dependency on other people. And that's what other countries are doing. And India is the same. India is exactly the same. The Central Bank of India reported just a couple of days ago that by 2030, they're going to make a huge shift off of fossil fuels, and that the Central Bank of India is setting 2030 as a key decarbonization date. So I said earlier, what does this mean for the stock price? So this shows the stock price over 5 years and a year of electric car manufacturers versus the European car manufacturers. And there's a much better table in today's FT if you've not seen it. And these share prices, since I did this last week, these share prices are down significantly more. Europe, we've tried to defend an old business model, and we've been kicked in the butt by Chinese exporting cheaply. I was listening on Radio 4 earlier this year to a review of the Shanghai, the Chinese car show, and they were getting EVs, basic EVs, list price $10,000. Basic EV. We can't make internal combustion engine cars here for $10,000 list price. We can't do that. And when you compete with a really expensive internal combustion engine versus a really cheap iPhone, mobile, whatever it might be, EV, it's difficult to compete. And that's why we're putting 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs. The Americans are. I forget what the European tariff rate is, but we're trying to defend our industries by keeping out cheap EVs, because we did the wrong thing 10 years ago by trying to defend with fuel efficiency standards. So let's have a look at what the oil industry is doing. And this is something Carbon Tracker studies very, very closely. We can sometimes give the narrative that the oil industry is doing more of the same. It kind of is, but what I want you to look at is the blue shows you capital expenditure in more oil and gas exploration. The red shows you dividends plus buybacks minus issuances, and the yellow is net debt repaid. I don't know if this is going to surprise you, but the European oil majors are down to the last 8 to 9 years of proven reserves. The US is about 15 years, OPEC is about 20 years. So they're running down their oil reserves in the expectation that they're going to get replaced. I think the oil companies know this, and the way that we know that they know this is because they're spending their cash not on more exploration, they're spending their cash on dividends. And that is another way of looking at the transition. It's a kind of a, we're giving up, guys, response by the traditional oil industry. So where do I think the shock is? What do I think investors should be concerned about? Much of the industry, OPEC, for example, and many companies are continuing to run as if the fossil fuel system will continue, but the reality of a rapid technology transition is creating the shock of stranded assets. There will be asset write-downs from oil refineries we won't need, which is why I think, was it Ineos or one of the ones that just closed down the refinery in the UK a few weeks ago? We're not going to need so much oil refinery capacity, the truth is. We're going to have to start to dismantle infrastructure. Somebody's going to have to pay for that infrastructure. And this is the reality of what we're seeing in the speed of the energy transition. I'm going to stop there. I hope some of this made sense.
I think it made a lot of sense. I thought that was fantastic. I do need a couple of minutes just to close for myself to say a couple of things about CPD, etc. But are there any immediate questions for Mark? Or can you join us for a drink, Mark? But can we take any immediate questions? Richard, I knew you'd have one.
That was brilliant, Mark. Can you just tell me when my bills will come down?
So, I'm not going to tell you to switch to Octopus, but if you're living in Scotland where there's a lot of cheap energy, do you know what? I think heavy industry should be moving to where the cheap free energy is. I think we should be building data centers in Scotland. It's not going to happen immediately, and a part of that is because what we've got to persuade the government to do is to split our energy bills from saying gas is the cost you this much, renewables cost you this much, and that we haven't completely we closed the last coal powered station, was it this week actually, or last week? It's going to take a little bit longer before we drive gas out of the system, and it depends on how much battery power we can build. And also there's a lot of solar that's ready to go. It's been built, but they queued up 6 years before we can get onto the grid. So what we actually need to be doing today is investing in grid connectivity, grid balancing, and that's a big challenge for the UK, not just the UK, but the rest of the world, is we've got all this cheap power coming on. We don't have a grid system that's able to get it to get it to people's homes.
I'm going to give Chris the last word.
Talk, really enjoyed it. And I wanted to ask you about carbon capture and how real it is. We've got a project happening where we live. Exxon are about to build they want to build a big pipeline to do it.
Yeah.
Is that real?
Okay, so to sell carbon tracker, we've done a great report. It's called Kind of Blue, which is the name of a Miles Davis album, as you know, and it's downloadable from Carbon Tracker's website. We will go into detail about the UK and carbon capture and storage, and there's so much optimism about it. What we've done some of the numbers, and we emit 40 gigatons of CO2 a year globally. Carbon capture and storage will shave a tiny fraction of that. We need to build 300 globally significant CCS plants a year, every year for 10 years, starting 10 years ago to dent where we are. So if you look up CCS on Carbon Tracker's website, we run through the numbers, and there's Kind of Blue, and there's another report that goes with it, really goes into the detail of why the economics of CCS doesn't work. Fossil fuels is expensive. Add on a CCS plant, you're doubling the cost to the consumer. Who's going to pay for it? And the government, the companies want consumer to subsidize it or governments to subsidize it.